21 masterclasses in new consciousness, new ways of thinking, being and doing for the new you. Pioneering thinkers from countries right around the world. Hello, Om Shanti, and a very warm welcome to the last in our series of 21 masterclasses in new consciousness, a series that has been looking at new ways of thinking, of being and of doing in today's rapidly changing world. My name is Philippa, and together we've been on quite a journey as we've been hearing the experiences of pioneering thinkers from countries right around the world, from all backgrounds and all walks of life, as they've shared with us their skills, their navigational tools for developing inner resilience for these extraordinary times. Now, of course, we've been recording these programs during the time of coronavirus, and what a time it's been. It's strange to think of some point in the future when we look back on this period and wonder how we will reflect on it as this time of the great pause, this time of the great turning, this time when really everything changed. And I don't think many people would disagree with the sentiment that we are now living in uncertain times and that we absolutely have many problems that we need to now tackle. And Einstein once said that no problem can be solved from the same level of consciousness that created it. And so very much this series has been exploring ways of creating a new consciousness, of looking at things with a fresh pair of eyes. The question is, does the spiritual perspective have a contribution to make in this new way of thinking and seeing things? And that's the topic of our final conversation today, spiritual perspectives on uncertain times. Now, our speakers throughout the series have been both students and teachers of the Brahmakumaris World Spiritual University. As the name suggests, it's a place of learning for the spirit of spiritual matters. And it has 110 countries around the world where there are teaching centres and an active presence in even more countries than that. It's an organisation that was founded in 1936 in India. And the founding father, Brahma Baba, had a series of visions and teachings that came through him, very much aimed at this period of transition that we're experiencing at this point in time. So it feels absolutely relevant to what we're going through right now. And one of the things that Brahma Baba felt very strongly from the beginning was that it was important that women were kept at the front, that somehow women had the qualities necessary to lead humanity at this time. And as a result, women have led the organisation since its beginning, and it's now the largest spiritual organisation of its kind in the world to be led by women. Well, let me introduce you to our speaker for today. And you've probably heard me mention in this series that the Brahmakumaris has a permanent office at the United Nations in New York. And since 1980, that office has been run by Gayatri Naraine, who's a student and teacher of the Brahmakumaris for the past 40 years. Her main role is to identify areas of UN policy with particular relevance to a values-based spiritual approach to life, creating statements and programs to promote that awareness. She's also spent the last 20 years exploring what she calls experiments in silence. Now, Gayatri has also co-authored a number of publications, including The Story of Immortality, A Return to Self-Sovereignty, and also Something Beyond Greatness, Conversations with a Man of Science and a Woman of God. Originally from Guyana, Gayatri now lives in New York, although she's currently in lockdown in the mountain area of upstate New York in the Catskill Mountains, at a place known as the Peace Village, which is a retreat centre set in 300 acres of land. And it's from there that Gayatri joins us now. Gayatri, welcome to the programme and thanks for being with us.
Thank you, Philippa. It's lovely to be with you and to go through this journey with you, because I know you've gone through it with others. And so it's my turn. So here we go.
And you get to have the last word, which is always a good position to be in. So let's see what we can conclude between us. But really, America has been very much in our minds in the last few weeks, as it seems that not as we have emerged from this period of lockdown barely, that America has been plunged into this sort of national experience in the aftermath of the George Floyd incident and the whole Black Lives Matter awareness that is really becoming very prevalent, not just in America, but right around the world. You must sometimes wonder whether America can hold out any more with everything that has been thrown at it. What's your sense of the mood in the country at this time now?
The mood in the country is extremely, extremely volatile. I think that it was one thing in which we were called upon to be in lockdown and social distancing with the COVID-19. And we saw that as important to take all the precautions necessary, to do what was right, to do what we were being told by the authorities and, of course, the Central of Disease Control. And we did everything we could. But there came a time, I think, that we were all in the lockdown and we were all thinking, sooner or later there will be a vaccine that will be invented. Sooner or later this virus will settle down. Sooner or later something will happen that would get us back into a sense of security and safety while being out there in the world and while doing the things that we have to do. But since March, what has been happening progressively is that the lockdown period seemed to be extending and extending and extending. And there came June, just when the governors were beginning to open up a little bit. The churches were told they can have 10 people in their congregation, and boom, something suddenly happened. And so when this case of this person and the video went viral, so when it was seen and everyone saw it, I think it took on a kind of hurt, a kind of open wound suddenly surfaced in many, many people's hearts. And it's not just of one race, I think it's of both races, to watch what could happen in a state of being in lockdown, and then when one is opening up to go back out, this could happen. And so I think the trauma that the country is facing right now is a trauma that I think is very, very deep, because on the one hand, what it erupted was a wound that is very deep in the American people and suddenly surfaced with a force that, again, like the coronavirus, I don't think they know how to deal with it. I don't think we know how to deal with it. And so therefore, I think that can the country deal with it? Can the people deal with it? Remains to be seen. But, for me, there's always hope. And we all have to look for this hope. Otherwise, it would be seen as something so devastating that we can't pick ourselves back up from it. And that would be sad. And so the spiritual response is look for the hope. The spiritual response for me is look for different ways that we can enter and we can offer things that are healing, that are seeing what's going on, as bad as they are, from different perspectives.
It's interesting to contemplate, what it takes for a nation to get to breaking point. And, countries around the world are discovering, what is that point for them as a country. But I know the United Nations predicted, even before COVID, that mental health challenges were going to be one of the main challenges of the future. And I know that there was a government helpline in the US for people who were concerned about their mental well-being, and the number of calls for people wanting antidepressants has been rising and rising, and yet people are reporting that their medication isn't working. It's almost that they can't relax enough for the medication to work, and people are realizing that it's almost like an illness in the soul, that there's a hunger, a thirst, a crying out from the soul for something to really be done. And I wonder if you detect a mood amongst those that you're in touch with, that really there is a move now towards seeing meditation not just as a practice, but almost as a way of life that now has to be taken up in order to survive what we're now going through. Do you pick that up at all?
Definitely, because you see, when I first came to New York, and the word meditation, I offered it to people, it was always with a hesitancy. I would say, I wonder if and this was in 1978, so I would say, I wonder if these people would understand the word meditation. When I invite them to come and do a meditation session, would they respond? And someone said to me, they say, don't bother about the word meditation, because in New York and in the United States in general, particularly on the East Coast and the West Coast, since the 1960s, they have been exposed to different kinds of yoga, different kinds of meditation, different kinds of teachings from the East. And, the Beatles from the UK brought it in. And, of course, there were a lot of others here, particularly on the West Coast. So what they said to me is, scratch the surface of the skin of a New Yorker and you'll find a meditator. So meditation has been something that they have been doing for a long time in this country. So it's nothing new to them. But I think that the meditation has been connected more to exploring how to do and think things and have a quick fix to things. How can I change a negative thought to a positive thought? How can I look at meditation as a way that can calm me, that can relax me? So it was used more as for relaxation and for, getting calm. But I feel that over the years, many people took the meditations and explored them within their own religions. And so many religions started having the contemplative pieces connected to the meditation pieces, and people then got comfortable with that. But now what I have noticed is that people are being affected mentally by what's going on. Now, this being affected mentally is not, I wouldn't say, a result, a direct consequence of COVID or a direct consequence of the racial demonstrations and the racial rioting we are experiencing now. But I think it was a build-up over the years, and people are having more to do and less time for themselves. They are having to live life in the fast lanes, and they're not taking the time to give themselves, the healing that is required, the distance from the work that they have to do. So they haven't integrated meditation as part of their living, as it were. And so, yes, you're right. What is happening now? People want more. And what they're saying, we want to go deeper. We want to go deeper, not just in the way we think and feel about things, but what are those patterns within ourselves that are so ingrained that I must now look at, because they're causing, those ingrained patterns are causing the problems. And the problems are not being removed no matter how much I work with my mind. For instance, like someone said to me that, I actually knew exactly that I needed to think a thought, and when that thought wasn't good, I could delete it. But I never asked myself, what's the origin of a thought? Where do thoughts come from? And as soon as you ask yourself that deeper question, you're touching on what I would call spirituality, but you're also touching on lifestyle. Because to ask what's the origin of a thought, you have to move beyond the mind. And you need to go into attitudes, you need to go into awareness, you need to go into consciousness. And so the removal of whatever are these patterns that are causing us or to have problems with the way we live our lives, or I would say create obstacles on the course of life, we have to revisit those patterns and we have to transform them and we have to heal at the level of the patterns in the soul, which I would call as sanskaras or personality traits that are connected to my spiritual characteristics and to my spiritual personality. And yes, people are moving in that direction slowly, but they are moving there.
And I wonder as well at the level of the organisation where you've had your office for 40 years, which is the United Nations building in New York. And your role there over those years has been to look at ways of implementing a spiritual trajectory into the work that's being carried out there in terms of policy statements that are being created. And the United Nations is celebrating its 75th year this year. And I wonder what you feel it needs to do as an organisation to really bring about cohesion at this point in time, in terms of what is the global response to the situation that we've been through, and in terms of bringing in that new consciousness. Do you feel the United Nations is now at a point where it can really engage with that agenda and start promoting a positive perspective based on new ways of thinking?
That's an interesting question, because the United Nations, when it celebrated its 60th anniversary, it actually had as its theme time for renewal. And so at that time, 15 years ago, I think they were looking at the aspects of renewal. Because it is a political organization, I think the word renewal from a spiritual context is quite different from renewal from a political context. And so I think they look at ways to transform the UN in a way at its administrative level. And they look at ways of how they can bring in more people who are visionary. How can they populate the organization with innovative programs? How can they put people at the center of development, which was going on anyway, but how to have a more focus on people. And then, of course, what emerged of the 60th anniversary was the Millennium Development Goals, in which they have, all these different goals, and the aim was to have a new world, a renewed world by the year 2015. Now, of course, it happened to a certain extent, but it wasn't that dramatic change under the banner of renewal. Now that we are celebrating the 75th anniversary of the United Nations, it is also at an interesting time. Since March, the United Nations is on lockdown. It's shuttered down. And they don't even see reopening it for the General Assembly. And if they do reopen it, it's only going to be for specific people, like the high-level diplomats that are going to be coming in for the high-level meetings. And so what is happening with the UN in the year 2020, when it is celebrating its 75th anniversary, is an interesting question to ask. It is also a time in which countries are becoming more unilateral, and the UN is a multilateral organization. So does it need a kind of reinventing? And if it needs a reinventing of itself, what would that look like? And it cannot be, I feel, the reinventing of itself based on the Sustainable Development Goals agenda, and the agenda, pivotal to that agenda is transformation. But it has to be something more. And what that something more is, I would say, to have a look at the UN, or the UN to have a look at itself from a different level of consciousness. Now, if you put a group of people representing their countries and representing the interests of their countries, and you say to them, now come together and have a session on reinventing the UN, they would all look at it from the interests of their countries, because that's what they represent. But the challenge is, how do you have, like what they did when they did the charter, a group of people who are not just thinkers in the sense of, what is going to happen to our world in the framework of the Sustainable Development Agenda, for instance, but how can we transcend the political agenda, and how can we transcend the limitations of everything that exists in the UN as an institution, and look at it from the consciousness of what was captured in the Charter of the UN. And in the preamble of the Charter of the UN, it states very clearly, one of the purposes of the existence of the UN is to reaffirm faith in the dignity and worth of the human person. So what if, for its 75th anniversary, a group of visionaries, a group of people who are prepared to look at the United Nations from a different level of consciousness, get together and took this one beautiful tenet from the preamble and look at it again? How do we make this organization work in order to reaffirm faith in the dignity and worth of the human person? I would like to see that happen. And then what would happen is it wouldn't come back to, do we change the charter? Do we rewrite the charter? Do we include this one here and exclude that one there? But it would really be looking at the UN from a perspective of a new consciousness. And if I can look at something from a perspective of a new consciousness, then I'll have to do what Rumi says. You know what Rumi says, that when you go beyond the wrongdoing and you go beyond the right doing, there's a field, and I'll meet you there. And I think that it is within that field that we need to step into and look at things from a new perspective and a new consciousness.
The analogy that's coming very much to my mind as you're speaking is that of the transformation of the caterpillar from a chrysalis to a butterfly. And there's a stage at which the chrysalis is hanging by a few threads, as within itself it's undergoing this profound transformation. And the cells of the old caterpillar are almost turning into a mush as it reimagines how it can emerge from that state into a new state of consciousness, and how it can go from being something that crawled along on lots of legs to something that learns how to fly. And it's almost as if humanity is hanging by the same thread as the old ways and the old systems are beginning to crumble and break down. And we're in this sort of sense of slight suspended animation when we can feel the old going and we can feel something new rising up to meet us, but we're not quite sure what that is yet. And I wonder what you feel the role of silence is in terms of this reimagining process. Because within silence, when you see it from a spiritual perspective, there is a power within that which has the ability to reimagine. And I know that silence is something that you have journeyed with quite a lot over the years. Could you say something about what you feel the potential is when we really tap into that inner resource within each one of us to experience profound silence, and what is the possibility of something emerging from that experience?
I love the analogy or the metaphor of the caterpillar and the butterfly, because I feel, it really tells us what's going on in the world. It actually really tells us what's going on now. We are in a period of lockdown, and we are caterpillars. We are constantly eating the grass. We are looking for every opportunity to connect. We are looking for more opportunities to connect now that we can't connect physically with people. And we're doing it through the internet. How many classes a day is one giving? How many people are listening to my classes? Caterpillar, eating the grass. At one level, it's good because I feel I'm needed by people. At another level, I'm offering people things that could be useful to them, and why not? I can do that. But I'm still a caterpillar as far as I'm concerned. Now, there comes a time when the caterpillar has eaten its full of the grass, and the caterpillar is recognizing it needs to rest. It needs to be in a place for a fundamental transformation to occur. It needs to go into its chrysalis. That metamorphosis has to happen. So, by choice or by compulsion, we have to get into that space of silence. And so I think rather than do it by compulsion, we can do it by choice. Because in the space of the silence, where the actual transformation occurs from the caterpillar to the butterfly, it's a lot of breaking down of almost everything of that caterpillar. And it gets into a formless state, it gets into this mushy state, it gets into a state in which there's almost what we call nothingness. And then it begins to reform itself into something so beautiful. But what happens in that process of its transformation within its chrysalis, somehow fundamentally its choices changes. And so that choice that changes in the fundamental shift within the chrysalis, it emerges, and rather than feed on grass, it begins to feed on nectar. It begins to eat and feed on something so refined and something so little that it nourishes it, because it understands somehow that this is what nourishes it. And so I think that this process for us is that we need to move from the expansion of everything outside the world, which is huge, and we need to move inside of ourselves, which I call a sacred space of spiritual silence. And that spiritual silence, for me, I make the distinction between when someone says go into silence as a punishment, or go into silence as a void, or going into silence and I'm so scared because I don't know what I will discover in the silence, because all I'm seeing is darkness. It's like being in a womb of darkness. But this is spiritual silence. It's saying go into a silence of discovery. Go into a silence of exploration. Go into a silence of depth. Go into a silence from which something new will emerge. And so within the silence, if we were to give ourselves permission to do it, and we go into the silence by choice, then we will discover beautiful things about ourselves that would transform those patterns I spoke about earlier. And once those patterns can be retraced and could be transformed, then when I emerge, my choices in life will be better. My choices in life wouldn't be like the caterpillar again, eating on everything I can, but it would be very selective. And I think if we can do that, even at the level of our relationship to our environment would be so happy with us. If we could live a life of simplicity, choosing that which only we need and not to fulfill our greed, and therefore abuse our environment in the fulfillment of that greed, then our environment would, when we're just choosing that which is the essence and that which is the nectar, our environment would be a much better home planet for us. It would offer us the best. It would respond to us in the way we treat it. And so I think that's one of the benefits of going into silence. If I say, go into silence, and then you would discover your divinity, people would say to me, I'm not ready for my divinity yet. I'm just ready to do things on the basic level of being a human being. Well, the basic level of being a human being is the way you have a relationship with the planet, your home planet, the basic planet that gives you life at a physical level and nurture the physical system. So how do I have that relationship that would make a difference to both me and the planet that I live on? And so it does need us to go into that depth of silence within ourselves, so that we can, I use the word again, reinvent our relationships, a relationship first and foremost with myself, with my fellow human beings, and with my world at large, but particularly at this point of time, my relationship with my environment.
As we were using this analogy of the caterpillar and the butterfly, if you were to look at a caterpillar crawling along, you would never in a million years imagine that it could transform into the beautiful butterfly that it becomes. And I wonder what for you see as the potential transformation for humanity in terms of what we have the potential to become. And looking at this quote from Einstein of needing to find a new level of consciousness to solve the problems, what for you is that level of consciousness that we need to start now moving into? And you've talked about the nectar, and I like that, but what really is that fuel of nectar that enables that shift to take place, that enables us to get to that next step of evolution, if you like, of humanity? How are we going to break through to that?
You know, there are things within ourselves that we refuse to look at. And I know that we look a lot when we're looking for transformation, we look at mindsets, change your mindset. We also look at the way we make our decisions and our ability to discern. We look at that level of ourselves. We talk about will, we talk about the human will, and we talk about political will, and we talk about this whole thing of willpower. But I think the one thing we haven't been looking at, and we should be looking at, because I feel that's where the strength of a change lies. But we need to have courage to do this. We need to have the courage to go inside and look at my conscience. Now, conscience is very important in the direction I will choose to take. And if I don't look at my conscience because I'm seeing my conscience as a place where my guilt lives, or the conscience as a place where my fears dwell, or the conscience as a place where my religion taught me that I would be doomed at the end of my life or else, however I see that conscience, I think we need to go in and look at that conscience in an enlightened way. Because just like when you have a GPS, what is embedded in the GPS that takes you from one place to another is a compass. And so this conscience in our human souls is our spiritual compass. And that spiritual compass will guide us in the direction we need to go to. Because I cannot discern something, whether it is right or wrong, in a domain of it being right or a domain of it being wrong. I have to kind of transcend both and go into a kind of a neutral domain, which I call a spiritual state of being, in a spiritual consciousness, in the domain of silence. And at that point, I will then connect with a conscience within. And when I go beyond the right and wrong, and I go to a level that transcends both, and I connect to my conscience will become an enlightened conscience that will then direct me, even maybe beyond the moral choices, to a spiritual choice. And for me, the spiritual choice is that the conscience will tell me that all human beings are born free and equal, endowed with reason and conscience. What does that mean? Or that all human beings are entitled to something like love, and love is a spiritual right. What will my conscience tell me then? Or there's enough in the world for every man's need, but not for every man's greed. What will my conscience tell me then? And I think one of the spiritual tools that is important for us to activate and use is that enlightened conscience.
There's a beautiful experience as well of silence which opens us up to a sense of the presence of something greater than ourselves, that there is some presence of divine love that we can tap into through the meditation experience of silence. How do you work with that in your daily life, and how do you experience the presence of that divine energy as a transformational tool within your own spiritual journey?
Well, my journey that I have spiritually is a journey that is Raj Yoga, which is having yoga or connection with the highest. And so when we talk about the word yoga, it's usually connected to physical exercises and pranayamas and breathing, etc. But when I talk about yoga, I talk about Raj Yoga, and it is a spiritual form of connecting to the Supreme Being, to a higher source, to the divine, to God. And so when the United Nations declared the 21st of June as the International Day of Yoga, and it's also the day of the solstice, I was very excited actually. But then what I saw was that it came back to yoga being connected to health and well-being. It's connected to the state of the human body in terms of its balancing and integrating. And it comes back to the physical exercises. So this year we've decided to connect yoga to love. Nobody sees yoga as love, but yet yoga is love. And what is that love? Yoga is the love between the soul and the Supreme Soul. And it's one of the most beautiful love stories in the world. It is referred to in India as the story of immortality, in which the soul reclaims that immortal love in its relationship to God. And so we're talking about the 8 postures of the heart in this beautiful love story. Why is it that it is so important for us to have a yoga with the Supreme Being, with God, with the Source, with the highest on high? Because what the world needs, and it's a cliche term, what the world needs now is love, sweet love. But what the world truly needs love. The world truly needs that love. And so how do I trust a love that will reform me from being someone that is totally frustrated with life to someone who can get an optimism to see life differently, to see life with a hope, to see the opportunities that are being offered? That requires from me a certain experience of love that can only come from the Supreme. How can I purify tendencies that are holding me in bondage, that aren't allowing me to move forward, and that's actually killing the life in me? Again, that experience with the Supreme, that love that will purify and remove those bondages so it can release me and I can let go of limitations that I created for myself. But most importantly, how do I look at my fellow human being as a brother and sister? How do I practice universal brotherhood or sisterhood? The only way that will happen is if I transcend the differences that our physical forms present in front of us. And if I can push the boundaries of my consciousness and opt for radical inclusion. And that means radical inclusion with me. I need to see you in your beauty outside of the limitations of your body, of your gender, of your religion, of your race, of your culture. And I can see you truly as a being equal to me. And that is only possible when we are soul conscious, when we are conscious of ourselves as these light force, these beings of light. And that is not enough, however. What we need to do for this radical inclusion bit and pushing the boundaries of the consciousness is that we have to go beyond just being brothers and sisters as a human to a human and be brothers and sisters as a spirit to a spirit, as a soul to a soul. And that is only possible when we come under the canopy of God's love. Because when we come into that relationship of God's love, then what we're seeing and experiencing is that everyone at some level has equal and full rights to that spiritual inheritance of love and peace and joy and purity and truth. They're all embedded in us. Why? Because we are children of God. And what ignites it is that flame of love. It's like the moth surrendering itself to the flame. It's like the little flame, coming under the sun, and suddenly I become the sun. So that kind of love, that kind of true, altruistic, spiritual, soul-conscious, beautiful love is what is required. And this is why having yoga with God is important, because that's the unifying force that we're all seeking today.
I love this idea of the yoga of the heart that you talk about. It feels really transformational to explore that territory. But I'm also aware that you're sat there with a picture of the founding father, Brahma Baba, on the wall behind you. And we've talked throughout this series of Brahma Baba having a series of visions and teachings that very much came through him. They didn't come from him, they came through him. And I wonder if you could just share something of what that vision was for the future of humanity that Brahma Baba tapped into and experienced so profoundly, and went on to build his whole life around that vision that he had. What was he seeing for the future?
I will start maybe with Brahma Baba's life at the time he left his body, at the time he passed in 1969 on the 18th of January. And I think I start with that because he left with us 3 words. And those 3 words actually described his whole life and what he did with his life in relation to the visions that he had and what he created on the basis of those visions. And those 3 words were incorporeal, egoless, and viceless. Now, one of the visions he had in 1936, to match the last of the 3 words that he left with us, is that we need to understand and to experience that there's a realm of life that is beyond the physical, that is beyond the corporeal, and it is called the incorporeal. There's that field of light in which souls dwell in their incorporeal form, and that field of light is called the home. So always remember, children, you are incorporeal beings, you are life force, you are souls. The second is egoless. Be egoless. Now, one of the things that we see in the world today that is like, I call it the big block to everything that's happening, the block to the conscience, the block to the will, the block to relationships, the block to seeing justice is the ego. And so what the whole process of a spiritual journey is actually all about is to relinquish that ego. It's to get rid of that ego. And to get rid of the ego means I have to get rid of the I and mine and, and me and my. And I have to see the world as a place in which I'm a trustee. I don't own anything. I'm a trustee of it. I didn't bring anything with me. I came into a world where everything was there before I arrived. And so that trusteeship of being egoless is very important on the spiritual journey. And viceless is to understand that as human beings, you're not enemies of one another. But if there is an invisible enemy that we are facing, it's of the vices. And so we have to conquer this vice. And guess what? the vice or the vices live inside of you. So you're not at war with the world, actually. You are on a battlefield within yourself, and you must conquer these vices. And so to become viceless means I have to clean up my own home, which is my soul, and then start cleaning my world, or do it simultaneously. So these three words was actually the words that Brahma Baba's entire life was based on. Additional to that, he was a man that saw things very differently, I think, from anyone else that was on a spiritual path in the days of 1936. And in those days, he was living in undivided India, and he was in Hyderabad, Sindh. Now, what he saw and what one of the visions were to put women at the helm of a transformation process that was spiritual in nature. And what he did was that he surrendered his entire wealth and resources to a group of 8 young women and formed the Brahma Kumaris. Now, the Brahma Kumaris, I always say, they flourish with the combined energy of Shakti, that comes from Shiva, God, and Gaia, that energy of the Mother Earth. And so with those two Shaktis, of course, with those two powers, the power of the Shakti and the power of the Gaia combined, of course, they will be instruments to transform the world. And so Brahma Baba saw that. And what he needed, I think, and what he had perhaps naturally, but what he needed as well throughout the process was to embody this virtue of humility. Because I think that without humility, there isn't greatness. And when you embark on a spiritual path, in a way, you're seeking a greatness that comes from a humility that is so vital to the way you treat one another and to the way you build something that would be totally inclusive. So you have to have the humility to see the specialties in others. And you have to have the humility to know that it is the coming together and the being together and being part of what he always called us as God's family, in which there will be a true moving together and moving into a world that he calls the Golden Age. So that was Brahma Baba's life, and I like to have his picture on the wall wherever I am sitting. And I'll tell you an experience I had yesterday. I was talking to a few people, and we were having a conversation on how to, we were creating a program for the International Day of Yoga, and we were talking about it. And all of a sudden, one of the people on the call, the Zoom call, stopped me and said, "Who is that person on the wall behind you?" And of course, I was stopped in the middle of my sentence. And I said, "Oh, he's the founder of the Brahma Kumaris. His name is Brahma Baba." And he says, "You won't believe it. He is so animated above you, on the wall above your head. He's so animated. He's almost participating in this conversation we're having." And I said, there you are, You never know that how people never really pass on. They live on in many wonderful ways in which they still contribute to a process of world transformation.
Well, that's a lovely note on which to end, with the thought that this journey that humanity collectively is now engaging with is going to benefit from help that is coming from the unseen realm, that we must remember that there are so many good wishes working with us at this time of change and transformation, and not to underestimate the potential of really harnessing what those energies are there and what they're capable of creating. It would be lovely, Gayatri, if we could just enter into an experience of silence, as we've been talking about it quite a lot. And if you could just guide us with your own thinking in terms of how to experience that space, that sacred space that you mentioned within us of silence, and really tap into the resource, the hidden resources that lie within us, when we really dive deep into that experience of silence. That would just be great. Thank you.
I invite you to be still. To be still is a pause. Life is full of natural pauses. I breathe in, and there is a natural pause before I breathe out. These pauses are entry points into silence. So let me consciously pause and center myself on the seat of the soul in the center of the forehead. The mind responds to this centering. And it becomes calm. The waves of thinking are settling into a calmness within. There is a deeper call from within. A call of a deeper silence. And I, the soul, respond to this call. And I move deeper within. And just like a scuba diver sees the jewels at the bottom of the ocean. At the bottom of my ocean of the soul. In the deep silence of my being, I also see my jewels. I connect with the jewel of love. I am love. I am a being of love. Love is what gives me worth. Love is what gives me beauty. Love is what gives me power. In discovering this precious jewel in my silence, I feel the rays of God like the supreme sun smiling down at the love in the depths of my soul. It is a silent union of the soul with God. It's an intimate feeling. It's a sacred trust. And I hold this. In the silence of my being. And I share it from the silence of my being. Om Shanti.
Thank you so much, Gayatri, not just for that beautiful meditation, but for all your sharing today. It's been spiritual, it's been profound. I really look forward to hearing the words of inspiration that you come up with for the celebration of the 75th anniversary of the United Nations. I think you probably already got the words within you. You just need to get them down on a piece of paper. So continue sharing that beautiful vision that you have for the world, and thank you for sharing it with us today.
Thank you, Philippa. It's lovely to be with you.
So, of course, this has been the last programme in this series of 21 masterclasses in New Consciousness. I really hope that you have taken some of the points into your heart and are practicing them in your life. And if you're left feeling that, what are you going to do now that the series has come to an end? Well, let me reassure you that whichever country you are listening from, there will be a meditation centre not far from you, and the Brahma Kumaris offer all their meditation classes and all their courses free of charge. So do look them up and continue the journey in your own way. And it's always a special experience to share that time together. But I thank you for sharing your time with us. And until the next time we do another series, keep safe, take good care, Om Shanti, and goodbye. 21 masterclasses in new consciousness, new ways of thinking, being and doing for the new you. Pioneering thinkers from countries right around the world.
Awakening to a new way of living.
बचपन से हम सुनते आ रहे हैं, काल करे सो